Okay, I think we can start. Good day, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on demystifying substances of concern in products compliance for 2020 and 2021. Next slide, please. Our agenda today will be an introduction to SCIP, its history and future. We'll be covering reporting in the SCIP database, explaining some facts around SCIP and hopefully bust a few myths, and discuss practical approaches to comply through all industries and IMDS registered industries as well. And finally, we'll have a recap. Next slide, please. And we are APA Engineering, a 20-year firm with over 300 employees, with over 350 customers around the globe, ISO certified in engineering, compliance, sourcing, and software. We provide services and compliance software with turnkey solutions for all the regulatory products that you see listed here. And now joining us, let me introduce Ms. Karen Strobel to walk us through an introduction to SCIP, its history and future. Karen?
Thanks a bunch, Ken. I appreciate the introduction, and it's a pleasure presenting to you today about SCIP. Next slide. First, I'll talk a little bit about the history of SCIP. Well before 2015, when SCIP was actually considered to be started, before 2015, the European Union and other countries had concerns about how certain types of substances were being disposed of in the environment. This led to a series of different types of regulations and enforcements around that. And in 2015, the EU tried to solidify that and unify the types of enforcements regarding substances of very high concern, which are SVHCs. Around that, in 2018, the EU started the Waste Framework Directive, or WFD. This was a good starting point to help in proper disposal of substances of very high concern, or SVHCs. And then most recently, literally in just over the past month or so, in July, the EU member states put together a transposition into national law of SCIP. Next slide. Now let's talk a little bit about the future of SCIP. In October 2020, the SCIP database will be released and available to start submitting your information around SVHCs. The legal obligation for SCIP compliance starts on the 5th of January 2021. And then the SCIP information will be made publicly available in the first quarter or second quarter of 2021, and it's hosted by ECHA, which is the European Chemical Association that will oversee the SCIP database. Next slide. Now, the SCIP database at a very high level, its intent is to reduce the use of SVHCs wherever possible, also to explore alternatives to SVHCs to reduce the overall waste of these types of substances. Also, SCIP will be designed to help waste operators to better educate them on proper disposal of SVHCs and a safer way to dispose of these particular types of substances. And then the government, the EU government, will be monitoring and overseeing this activity in hopes to see a trend in the reduction overall of SVHCs. This scope of SCIP does apply to EU manufacturers, assemblers, distributors, and importers. So basically, if you are manufacturing, assembling, distributing, or importing a product into the EU, it's important that you take a good look at SCIP and determine whether or not your products might be impacted by this new regulation. Retailers, generally speaking, are not obligated to participate in SCIP. However, I strongly encourage retailers to make sure you align with your suppliers to make sure that there are any areas of SCIP that are covered. There could be exceptions to that rule. If there are further questions around that, APA is here to help you answer those and dig into them if needed. Next slide.
Thank you, Karen. And now let's hear from Sonia on reporting in the SCIP database. Sonia?
Thank you, Ken. First, I would like to explain what an article and complex object is, which are the main reporting elements of a SCIP submission. So, an article is the object which, after getting a specific design and shape, determines its function rather than its chemical composition. For example, a bowl. And complex objects are made by assembling these articles together, like a drive shaft assembly. Since SCIP complements the existing REACH Article 33 obligations, reporting has to be done at article level. That means we should follow O5A principle. Once an article, always an article. So while making a SCIP submission, you are not supposed to report all the identified SPHCs under a complex object. In the middle, you can see a SCIP submission made for a drive shaft assembly, which is a complex object, where lead, which is a SPHC, is present in article named bold. So instead of reporting lead directly under the drive shaft assembly, it is declared at article level bold. And this is how SCIP data has to be reported for all of your products. Next slide. Next, what are the different steps involved to make a SCIP submission? First step is to create dossier in the SCIP format. Then submit the dossier to SCIP database. And finally, once the submission is done, you will get a report with a SCIP submission number for your registered product. And this whole process can be accomplished in 3 ways. The first 2 ways is through using Euclid software, which ECA is offering free of charge. Here, you can do dossier creation and submission manually, either by accessing the ECA Cloud services online, or you can download and install the Euclid software in your local desktop and create dossiers offline. The final option is through using system-to-system services. Here, you can sync any in-house or third-party software where all SCIP-related information is available, and dossiers can be created in Euclid format. And once it is linked to the SCIP database, submissions can be made on an automated manner. To start with the process, you need to have a valid ECA account with subscription to ECA Cloud services and ECA Submission Portal as well. And before making any submission, please ensure that the data is complying with SCIP validation rules, especially the business rules, because violation of any business rule leads to the rejection of submission. Next slide. Now, let me explain the data requirements to make a SCIP notification. Mainly, there are 3 sections, where first is the article identification, which includes the article name, primary article identifier, and article category as the mandatory requirements. Second is the concern element, through which we can understand all substance-related information. The mandatory fields related to that includes the candidate list substance name, concentration ranges, and material or mixture category, providing the substance location details. And the final element is the safe use instructions, which will allow the proper management of article once it becomes waste. Next slide. Because of the complexity of the SCIP requirements, ECA is coming up with few approaches to help its stakeholders in meeting the obligations. First one being the simplified SCIP notification, in short as SSN. Through this, one can make a simple submission by referring to the data already submitted by their suppliers. and this will be mainly useful for distributors who does not make changes to products. Second one is referencing, through which you can refer to articles already notified in SCIP while making a submission for your complex object. This approach will be useful for product assemblers. And the last one is submitting data on behalf of another company as a foreign user. This feature will allow all other third parties to submit data and support their customers in meeting SCIP compliance.
Okay, and now we're going to turn it over to Shri to cover facts of SCIP, debunk some myths, and then walk us through the steps to comply. Shri?
Thank you, Ken. Good day to all. From previous slides, we understood, next slide, please.
Next slide, please.
From previous slides, from previous slides, we understood that the scope of SCIP applies to anything that is being placed on the European market after 5th Jan 2021, and if the SVH is in the article is over 0.1%. However, there are certain exemptions also. Any article which is manufactured in the EU and sold outside the EU doesn't fall under this scope. Similarly, an article which is manufactured before 2021 Jan and not placed on the market after 2021 Jan doesn't fall under this scope. Also, the articles which are only repaired, such as refurbished, serviced, and not supplied, are also not covered under the scope. Lastly, the European Union member states have the authority to expand the exemptions, keeping defense and security interests in mind. Companies can take this in mind to avoid some SCIP notification. Next slide. Let's talk about some myths many may feel, but the facts are different. We know that from ROHS and REACH, ROHS and ELV does not need respective compliance for the packaging and spare parts, but SCIP doesn't spare them at all. Similar to the REACH requirements, all packaging, spare parts, even the articles we buy from e-commerce portals such as Amazon or whatever, also need SCIP submission. Medical devices are also included in the SCIP scope like ROSE and REACH. Is SCIP only a one-time submission? Definitely no. Like REACH, whenever there is a change in the SVHC list, the article requires an update on the communication across the supply chain. If new SVHC is present in that article especially. Similarly, if the article composition has changed and the article has SVHC on it, the EU requires a resubmission of SCIP. Please note that REACH communication obligation does not replace with the SCIP notification to the EU. The current communication across the supply chain and SVHC is still needed. If you look at the fundamental difference between REACH and SCIP with respect to an article manufacturer at high level, in case your article has SVHC over 0.1%, REACH requires communication only among the supply chain on the SVHC present under normal conditions, and it is not required to notify to ECHA. Whereas in SCIP, it requires to notify to ECHA SCIP database at every article level. Next slide. Sorry. Let's talk about some practical approaches towards complying the SCIP for various industries. For the benefit of audience, we have categorized industries into two. First, all industries. Second, industries which are using IMDS, especially the automotive industry. Next slide. So when it comes to all the industries such as electronics, electrical, aerospace, telecommunication, and many other industries like medical, the most common practice of sharing the SVHC info is through certificate of compliance. In short, we call it as COC, which normally has only SVHC names and the CAS numbers included at the part or complex object level, and but not at article level. But some do give them, but normally it is not. With the SCIP, the existing COC format is not enough, and COC must include the information of SVHC in the respective article in the complex object, and the customer should also encourage full material disclosure from supplier. Next slide. APA suggests the following preparatory steps for SCIP preparation. The first, identify the parts which are covered under the scope. Second, check the data availability. Third, start collecting the COC or FMD or IPC class A, class C, class T, whatever from the supplier immediately, because we are running short of time and it is only 6 more months more. If your in-house team cannot handle the supplier chasing and data collection, take help from the third-party companies. Especially supplier relation and data collection is a laborious work, and one has to be persistent with the suppliers and validate the responses regularly. Fourth, if the company has good amount of SKUs or part numbers, it is suggested to go for a software-based SCIP solution rather than the manual methods. But not last but not least, please be ready to receive the request from your customers. Have the SVHC articles, SVHC details in the articles and their locations in handy. Already many of the EU manufacturers have started this exercise. Recently, IPC 1752A, the current declaration format, which is widely used in the electrical and electronic industry, they have revised the standard to IPC 1752B, which includes the SCIP attributes. Next slide. When it comes to the automotive industry or the companies who are registered in IMDS, the burden is comparatively less as they have full material declaration available for their parts in IMDS. The good news is IMDS is planning to add new attributes called article category, production in EU, and safe instructions from next release 13 in IMDS. The current version is release 12. The 13 version is expected to be rolled out in the early October. As per the newsletter which was circulated by IMDS on 8th July, it says it is possible to transfer the relevant MDS from IMDS database to SCIP database one by one. Next slide. Even though IMDS has the full material declaration available for most of the parts, some article information which is falling in the scope of SCIP may be missing in the IMDS database. Especially MDS for packaging and spare parts may be missing. To be specific, packaging parts are may not be reported in IMDS in most of the cases. Also note that if existing MDS has highly confidential substances or secret substances, one must request or confirm with the supplier on the SVHC substances. Even though IMDS EULA end user license agreement says if some supplier chooses to have highly confidential substances like miscellaneous, not to declare, whatever, it is that those substances are not supposed to have SVHCs, but it is better to cross verify with the supplier once again. We also recommend the supplier to use confidential substance as a name instead of highly confidential substances. Please ensure that you have the IMDS updated as per the latest BOM and have the SVHC analysis done and keep it handy. Yeah, next slide. Ken.
Now to recap, thank you, Sri. SCIP is effective the 5th of January, 2021. It is a legal requirement to register in the SCIP database for any articles that will be placed on the EU market if the substance of very high concern is greater than 0.1% of the article. Every EU supply chain member is required to register in SCIP if the complex article has an SVHC of over 0.1%. Start your communication with your suppliers for this SVHC data, either bill of material or formulary, in the plant's location now. There are 3 ways to register: cloud, desktop, or system to system. Now is the time to act. The call to action is to get moving quickly. And for those of you using IMDS, remember that your data may not be sufficient. Next slide. APA is here to help with consultation and roadmap. We can be your supplier liaison and SCIP data collector. We work to update SCIP declarations, and we provide turnkey solutions through APA's SCIP software or manual declaration of SCIP. We can work with IMDS users, and we work with all industries and companies with our web-based SaaS model, system-to-system transfer of data, or APIs for third-party integration. Dealing with SCIP, REACH, ROAS, Prop 65, and other regulatory modules. We provide separate logins for our vendors and clients with quick dashboards and detailed bill of material reports. And we manage both complex objects and single articles. And we accept industry standards, IPC 1752A and B. Next slide. We also offer other software tools for additional regulatory complexity needs like conflict minerals, California Proposition 65, MDS, REACH, SCIP, and ROS. And then for can it be sold items throughout the United States, we can tell you down to the municipality level whether there are issues with your product and whether you can or cannot distribute in that area. In closing, you will be presented with a brief survey as you exit the webinar today, and we greatly appreciate you taking the time to complete this. For those who complete the survey, we will provide our SCIP checklist and our step-by-step roadmap within the next few days. All attendees of this webinar will receive a copy of this webinar. Finally, we will be answering any questions and comments you posted during the webinar within the next few days. Remember, you can reach us at compliance@apaengineering.com. Next slide. Thank you, and this concludes our webinar today.